Now soon I'm going to have to, well I don't have to, but I'm going to want to um, put a logo on the headstocks that I make, starting with this one on the Toronado. And, well, to cut a long story short, this is how I might do it. It's a Monster Guitars stamp, a rubber stamp. There we are, we're in focus. So that I would literally stamp it on with ink. There are a few ways that you can put logos onto headstocks. A common way for guitars is to use a water slide decal, which means you have to, well, you have to buy water slide decals. And I would rather avoid that if I can avoid it. So I'm just trying this out on some scrap wood to see what sort of image it makes. Now get a look at that. That actually looks really good. So I'm going to let that dry. But I'll put another one on as well. That one's going with the grain. I'll get one that goes across the grain, just because you want to see all the different ways it's going to turn out. But the main reason I'm doing this, yeah, that looks quite impressive. Quite impressive, I think. But the main reason that I'm doing this is because I'm going to be putting a clear coat over top of this on the guitar. So I'm going to put the same clear coat over the top of this, just to make sure that it doesn't interfere with it or make it smear or anything like that. So I'll give that a good dry. In fact, I'll use the hairdryer, and then I will wipe on some polyurethane. That's how I'm going to finish the headstock, like the whole neck. So I'll do that now and see how it turns out. Now, as you would expect, now that it's dried, you can't see it so much on the video. It has faded slightly. It looks much bolder when it's wet. But, I mean, that's one of the nice things about putting it under a clear coat, is that it will always have that wet look. Now, I'm not being too fussy about how I go about applying this. It's not going to be a finished product. It's just to make sure that the polyurethane does not interfere with the ink. And sure enough, it looks jolly good. Okay, and you really only, well, I think I really only need to put one coat of this on. I don't need to put a finished, built-up coat of lacquers on there, because if it can handle one coat, well, that one coat of polyurethane will protect the ink from all the other coats, won't it? So I'll just let that dry and inspect the results. I did expect that this would go quite well, and fortunately, those expectations seem to be met. In addition to that one wipe-on of polyurethane, I've sprayed it with some aerosol polyurethane just to build it up a little bit to see how it will look. Now, this wood, Rimu, very nice though it is noticeably darker than the tawa from which the neck of the Toronado is made. So the contrast between stamped image and wood will be even greater on that guitar, which is good because it looks to be perfectly adequate on this piece of wood here. And I really like, I mean, this is still very wet, but it's going to look basically the same when it's dry. It's, the ink is not running or bleeding or anything like that. So this looks great. I guess I won't be buying decals for my headstocks. The moment of truth is upon us. I have done the final sanding of the neck. I'm just making sure the stamp is nice and clean and it all looks good. Gee, I don't want to get this wrong. Nervous. Plenty of ink on the stamp. That is a success. Now we wait for it to dry, and then I will put the clear coat on. That's cool. Here in this container of finish, and you can tell it's oil-based because it has that yellowish color to it, I've got about a 50-50 mixture of clear polyurethane varnish and white spirits, also known as mineral spirits. And I'm going to cover up what I have just stamped on. I'll be applying this with a pure cotton, I think it's pure, but it's cotton-ish cloth. And I'm just going to apply it by wiping it on. You can apply polyurethane any way you like and any way you have the ability to do, I guess. You can brush it on, you can spray it on, or you can do what I'm doing. As I discovered in testing this, that's gone on over the ink well. There's been no running or bleeding, which is great. I'll let that dry just a little, and then I'll flip this neck over. I'll leave the headstock hanging over the end of the table, and then I'll do the underside. With the slightly diluted version, or the 50-50 diluted version, it's so much easier to go on. It just glides on. But you can definitely see, even just after that one coat, how much nicer this thing is starting to look. Alright, so here's an update. It's going to need a few, well, not need, but I'm going to want to put a few more coats on than I initially thought. This stuff, diluted as it is, well, it's quite thin. I said I was going to put 5 or 6 coats on there, but I'm probably going to go up to about 10 coats. I mean, I don't have to have it particularly thick, but I do want it thicker than it is now. And it's not going to be a thick, glossy coat. You can do that with polyurethane, but you wouldn't do the wipe-on method that I'm using here. So I'm about halfway. And it looks and feels nice, but I just want it a bit thicker. We're up to 7 coats now, and it's starting to look, I mean, it looked okay before. It's starting to look even better. I'm really starting to see some depth there. So I will go all the way to 10. I may even do more, but I think 10 should be adequate. I have it on good authority that there's no need to fine sand between coats of polyurethane because each coat really does fill in the one below. So I haven't been fine sanding, and I won't until right at the end. After I've finished all the coats and they're dried, then I will consider my options when it comes to polishing. Right, well, I've got 9 or 10 coats. I think I've lost count. It's one of those. But I looking and touching, it looks and feels to me like it's got enough. It really does. So what I'm using now is a technique called wet sanding, and depending on the order in which I show my videos, you will have seen me do this before, but I've got some 1200 grit sandpaper, so very fine, soaking in this bowl of water, and with the wipe-on polyurethane, it's very smooth already, so I'm just barely touching it, and you've got to be careful about angles, about going over the edges, where it's very easy just to sand right through the varnish. So just be careful about that. I'm barely touching it, just touching it enough to take off the very, very small irregularities that will be there. So it was pretty smooth before. It's going to be even smoother now. So I'm doing this all over the varnished surface, very, very gently, and you'll get this white substance. I don't know if you can see it from there. That's just polyurethane, the very small amount of polyurethane that is being sanded off. Because wipe-on polyurethane by its nature is not very thick, you just have to be so careful. Now I did do about 10 coats, which is the equivalent of and it was diluted 50-50, so roughly the equivalent of 5 coats non-diluted stuff. So it's not super thin, but you still have to be careful. As with all things, and touch is a great guide. If it feels really nice and smooth with no bumps or anything, then there's no reason to continue. You don't just do it for the sake of it. That is starting to feel really nice. So I'm going to take it off the clamp just to make sure that I get all around the heel, because I did put a very small amount around the sides of the heel, and if it's there at all, then it's worth having it there nice and smooth. So I'm just going to go over all the surface now of the varnish, get that done, and then we'll look at polishing this thing. Back soon. Well, after the wet sanding, I used my polisher on this, and now it's not a super high gloss. It's not, I don't have that much depth in the coat. This is just a wipe on, but it's nice and shiny-ish, and it's certainly got a very nice smooth feel to it. And you'll see how I go about using the polisher when it comes to finishing the body. So without further ado, let's turn to the paint job.